Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Ideas for Tomorrow.
Welcome to this virtual Ideas for Tomorrow. Thank you for joining us. Stephen Schwarzman has had one of the most remarkable careers of our time in finance, real estate, and philanthropy. As CEO of the Blackstone Group investment firm, he made this company as one of the largest and the most prominent firm in the financial industry and the largest owner of real estate on earth. His generosity is equally remarkable, accounting to billions of dollars for education, culture, and aid to the underprivileged. Here is a video to tell you more.
Entrepreneur, investor, philanthropist. Known as one of the most influential people in the country, financier Stephen Schwarzman shares his resources and insight to make a difference in the world. At an early age, Stephen Schwarzman worked at his father's linen store in Philadelphia, making 10 cents an hour folding handkerchiefs. At 14, his first business venture was a lawn mowing operation, employing his younger twin brothers while he brought in clients. Steve attended his local public high school in Abington, Pennsylvania, where he stood out as a student, athlete, and leader. After graduating with a BS from Yale and an MBA from Harvard Business School, he entered the investment banking industry, working at Lehman Brothers, where he quickly advanced to become the firm's head of global mergers and acquisitions. But in the midst of his successful career, Steve decided to set out on his own, partnering with former boss Pete Peterson to create Blackstone in 1985. Steve and Pete sought to create a new kind of financial firm, one that emphasized a culture of meritocracy, openness, and integrity, and that took an entrepreneurial approach to best serve its clients. Since its founding, Blackstone has grown to become one of the world's foremost investment firms, currently managing $538 billion on behalf of clients that include major endowments, sovereign wealth funds, and retirement systems that represent tens of millions of pensioners in the U.S. and around the world. Despite the growth, the firm has not lost its focus on culture and people and engages its teams and invests resources to strengthen the community. Stephen Schwarzman and his success top all of the lists. He has helped each of the last 3 presidents with initiatives ranging from veterans hiring to providing advice during the global financial crisis and recent trade negotiations.
I also admire him because I've watched him operate as a business statesman on the global stage. It's about how a great mind with the capacity to get things done.
Steve has donated over $1 billion in his lifetime and recently signed the Giving Pledge, committing to give the majority of his wealth to philanthropic causes. In both business and philanthropy, Steve Schwarzman has dedicated himself to tackling big problems with transformative solutions. Major recent gifts include a £150 million gift to the University of Oxford to help redefine the study of the humanities, a $350 million gift to establish a new College of Computing at MIT, which will reorient MIT to address the opportunities and challenges presented by the rise of artificial intelligence, including critical ethical and policy considerations. He founded an international scholarship program, Schwarzman Scholars, which seeks to educate future leaders about China and improve ties and understanding between China and the rest of the world. He is also a longtime supporter of the Inner City Scholarship Fund, which provides tuition assistance to underprivileged children attending Catholic schools in the Archdiocese of New York. And his donations benefit the USA Track and Field Foundation, which supports athletes as they train to represent the U.S. in global competition, among many other organizations. With a desire to share his vast experience in business, philanthropy, and public service, he wrote the New York Times bestseller, What It Takes: Lessons in the Pursuit of Excellence. Fostering innovative ideas, promoting healthy economies, and enabling social progress across the globe, Steve Schwarzman sets the standard in leadership, working to make the world better, now and for generations to come.
Steve, thank you for joining us today.
Well, glad to be here. Thank you very much.
Well, we're very sorry that because of this COVID pandemic, we couldn't host you here in person, here in Cleveland, but I understand that you visited a Cleveland clinic once before and you've been to Cleveland on a couple of occasions.
Yeah, I had a really good experience with one of my partners who had a procedure at the clinic, and I came out and visited him on a surprise basis. So he definitely was surprised. And I walked around. It was really fantastic. It was modern and clean, and everybody was efficient. And I had an extremely positive impression. He had a great outcome. So those are the positive sums situations that you like to see. And I said earlier, I went to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I'm from that generation where there were one-hit wonders, and I had a great time.
It's interesting when you mention the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I am here with your book, with your memoirs that you've published. And interestingly, when I was reading the chapter from your high school days, I understand that you were actually very active in the areas of popular music, and you managed to attract some pretty well-known bands to your school. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I found it very, very, just frankly hilarious that you managed to orchestrate that without any money and any backup.
Well, Philadelphia, where I was raised, was the home of American Bandstand. So they were always breaking the latest acts nationally in the United States there. And when I became president of my high school, I just didn't want to do the same stuff that everybody else did. That's my nature. I always like to try and do something different that I think people would really like. One thing for sure, if you brought one of the top rock and roll acts to a high school, in this case it was in the suburbs, I thought that would really shock people and be a terrific thing. And so I set out to do it. Everybody thought I was sort of a little daffy. They probably were right, but we managed to get a group called Little Anthony and the Imperials, who had a #1 hit called Tears on My Pillow. Pain in my heart by you. In any case, so there they were. And I've done a lot of things in my life that, sort of have aspects of that kind of theatricality or whatever, but sort of adapted to being a grown-up, where it's in different types of fields.
Well, that is amazing. You must have been very, very popular, right after that performance. That must have been the performance of probably an entire school history.
Yeah, but you learn in life. You have these moments of sort of highs, but you always have to be prepared for some type of low. Yeah. Things sort of. Don't always take the course that's planned for them, but that was really a lot of fun. Yeah. I did a whole ballet thing in college. I started ballet group and sort of took students. I went to Yale to New York City Ballet, and I brought the company up to New Haven. I organized a dance troupe. Sort of a festival for the Seven Sisters schools, because I thought I could get every guy in an all-male school to actually attend this. Not exactly sophisticated marketing, but they showed up. It was hugely successful, and these types of things are fun for me.
Oh. But tell me, I had absolutely no doubt that you would be able to attract your male colleagues to attend the ballet performance at Yale. But how did you get the ballet, New York City Ballet, to come to Yale to perform? I mean, there was a famous era in New York City Ballet. They were saw it all over the world. And how does a guy coming from Yale with, I'll just assume, no money and no funds, convince the ballet to come down and perform?
Yeah, that's a good question. At that time, New York City Ballet was acknowledged as being the best in the world. George Balanchine was their ballet master and choreographer, and really astonishing company. And I decided I wanted to bring them up to Yale. I had no money. I had no organization, and I knew no one. So this is, you sort of can't be much worse. It's worse situated. And so I went down to New York. I took the train, and I found the New York City Ballet Theater, and they had a guard there, unfortunately. And I waited until he went to the bathroom, and then I just snuck in, and I started walking around, and nobody stopped me, so I just kept walking, and eventually there are a few offices like there are in every performing arts company, and I ran into somebody, and they said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm here from the Yale Ballet Society," of which there was none at that time. And I said I wanted to invite the New York City Ballet to come up and perform. And the guy said, "Well, we don't do things like that, and I said, "Well, to make it worse, we really can't pay you anything because students don't have any money. But I said, students are your future audience, and you need to cultivate that. And a lot of them will be moving to the New York area after they graduate." And I said, "I think this could really be a good opportunity for you." So the guy looked at me, and I'm surprised he didn't call the security. And so then he said, that's not a bad idea. We can't send the company, but what would you think if we sent, like 4 or 6 people to just put on some pas de deux and sort of entertain you? And I sort of went, my goodness. I said, that sounds great. And they actually came up, and I combined that with the dance festival I had with the 7 sister schools, and I got a guy named Walter Terry, who was the leading dance critic of the time, to come up and follow them. And so he wrote a lovely review, and so we took nothing and sort of made it into something. And then as long as it was working well, I went back to the New York City Ballet people, and I said, it would be great if everybody who was at this festival could come down to New York City and see a performance for free. And he said, "Well, but we sell tickets." And I said, "But we have no money." So he said, "Well, look, we do dress rehearsals. We're having one coming up of the Nutcracker. And why don't you can bring as many people as you want to that." So I organized busloads of people from all the girls' schools, all the Yale people, and basically filled about half of New York State Theater. That worked out pretty well. So what I've learned in life, and I don't know why we're spending a lot of time on this, it's an odd little piece of my life, but you can do a lot of stuff. If you have a vision of what you want to do, you're prepared to be told no. And you always have to have some logic as to why this is interesting to somebody else, not just to you. If you really beg in a convincing way, someone may take pity on you, and you get something going.
Well, that negotiating skill must have served you well throughout your career, and the ability to convince people to do something which they would initially resist to do, but with a new perspective and a fresh perspective, they may actually realize that there is something behind this. But as you said, not every negotiation results with a success. In your early days, you were trying to get into Harvard first rather than to Yale, and just didn't work out the first time around.
Yeah, that didn't work out for me. I thought, at that point, I graduated from high school in 1965. Harvard was the reference institution in the country, and so I thought I should go there because, that would help me in life. And I've always been attracted to things that represent excellence. And I was put on the waiting list. And so I wanted to get off of the waiting list. So I decided to call the Dean of Admissions of Harvard. We didn't have cell phones back then. And so I didn't want to make the call from home because I was too nervous. I didn't want my parents to hear anything I was doing. So there was only one phone in the high school. It was near the gym, and it was a payphone, which mostly don't exist anymore anyhow now. And so I took a bunch of quarters because you had to put those into the payphone. And I had looked up in the directory the phone number at Harvard for the admissions department. So I called it and said, can you connect me with the deans and whatever his name was at the time. And so they put me right through. He picked up the phone and I said, hi, I'm Steve Schwarzman from Abington High School in Abington, Pennsylvania. And I'm on the waiting list and I'd like to be admitted. And I think it would be a really good thing for Harvard. So he said, how did you ever get through to me? He said, I don't talk to people, let alone applicants. And I said, well, I just dialed and asked for you, and they connected me. So he said, well, look, you sound like a very nice young man, but the problem is that we're not going to be taking anyone from the waiting list this year. We had a very big yield. So where else were you accepted? I said, well, I was accepted at Yale. He said, well, Yale's a fine place. And I'm sure you'll have a very good time there. And I said, I'm sure I'll have a good time there too, but that wasn't why I called. I called to get in. He said, yes, I'm aware, but we really won't be able to help. But I said, I think this will be good for Harvard in the long term. And he said, I'm sure it would have been, but we can't do it. So flash forward about, 30, 40 years. And I had a guy in my office at Blackstone in New York, and he happened to be one of the, not overseers on the Harvard Corporation, which is either 6 or 8 people who actually serve as the inside board and run Harvard. So this story came up, and he said, what year was that? I said, that was 1965. And he said, was the Dean of Admissions Mr. So-and-so? And I said, yes, that was the name. He said, well, he's a great friend of mine. Would you mind if I told him this story? And at that point, I had already given a bunch of big things to people. So 2 weeks later, I got a letter from the Dean of Admissions at Harvard from 1965. And he said, dear Mr. Schwarzman, I heard from this other gentleman that story of you calling me in 1965. I remember that phone call 40 years ago because nobody ever got through to me. And I don't know how you did. And I remember you saying that you should be admitted. And I told you there was basically no place at the inn. And you told me basically that would be a mistake for Harvard. And I've had the experience of reading about you for many years and all the wonderful things you've done that you would have done for Harvard. And I sort of kick myself every time I see you visible someplace. So I just wanted you to know, I remember the whole experience. And in my position, he said, you just never quite know who's gonna break out. Yeah. And we do the best we can. He said, I blew it in your case, which I thought was all pretty funny.
Yeah, although that must have been very, very funny for you. I'm not so sure it was so funny for the person on the receiving end, but nevertheless, a wonderful story. But your connection with Harvard actually exists. You went to Harvard Business School, and you continue to be involved with education. So since we're on that topic, you've made a very generous commitments to a number of large educational organizations, for which all of us in a broader academic environment are very grateful. Could you speak about a little bit about your views of education today? What are the reasons why you're supporting certain educational institutions? What do you think that we could do differently or better in an educational system as a whole? I understand that this is a broad topic, but I'm really interested in your views.
Yeah, well, there's education goes from preschool all the way up to grad school. And, I've been active in almost all those areas, just starting with, universities. I've supported a number of them. I started a program in China, actually, at their number one university called Tsinghua, which is where the president of China went, the previous president of China went, and a lot of their senior officials to basically, it's a program sort of like the Rhodes. It's called the Schwarzman Scholars. It's one of the top graduate fellowships now in the world. And to take people from around the world to China to see what China's like so they can experience it and explain it to other people and basically try and get in the way of what I thought was going to be an increasingly fraught relationship between a rising power, which was China, and an established power, which is the United States. It turned out it's a good thing I started it at the time I did, because it couldn't do it now. So I used a university as the mechanism to do that, and that was a good choice. I got interested in artificial intelligence by meeting Jack Ma, who's the head of Alibaba. It's a giant company in China in the internet area. And Jack started talking to me about AI. I didn't know anything, and it became clear to me that this was going to be a revolution, much like the Industrial Revolution that was coming. And there were a variety of different views as to whether this would be a force for good or a force for ill, or both. I decided that this would be something that I could potentially make a contribution to, not as a scientist, but more in terms of the AI ethics and application of the technology, and how would you regulate something like this on a global basis for the good of society. I ran into the president of MIT because we were taking students from MIT, among others, for the Schwarzman Scholars. And we cooked up an idea together to basically start a new college of computing at MIT, because 40% of their students were doing it. That's the expansion area. So we use that to basically create a new vehicle for MIT to coordinate all of their activities in computer science, but also link AI as a model for other universities to every part of MIT. So MIT would become the first AI-enabled university in the world, which would accelerate research in every part of their university. Now, the thing that was motivating me was basically to start an arms race in the United States and the West, because nobody's going to just watch MIT do that. They're going to want to try and use this technology. And what I was really trying to do was boost U.S. competitiveness in this area. And I used MIT as the vehicle for that. I gave them $350 million. I never even thought, I mean, that as an aspirational goal for my whole life wasn't even there. let alone give it away. And so that led me to get involved with Oxford, that wanted to have a humanities center, the number one university in the world with in humanities, but they never co-located anything. So they had a project to co-locate it and build a beautiful building. But I was interested in sort of a broader concept, which involved using the performing arts to basically show what was going on at different historical periods in the humanities. So you could have a movie of Crime and Punishment. You could be studying Russian literature. You can have Tchaikovsky playing, so that kind of thing. And I wanted to use the humanities as the basis of an AI ethics institute, because Oxford had the number one philosophy department in the world, and also knit the other parts of Oxford to participate in the AI ethics. So that became a very interesting project, and I did a big one for Yale as well. I happened to go to Yale. I had a great time there, as the dean of admissions at Harvard said I would. They never had a student center. They were organized much like Oxford and Cambridge, with separate colleges, and where students lived and did social activities, and they never had a core. So we used one of the biggest buildings on campus that could put 4,000 people in this, and that's going to be opening in September of next year, because it was delayed in construction, renovation, and we'll be able to have all the student clubs there. We'll have major performances. It'll be open till 2 a.m. or something for students to socialize. The only time graduate students meet undergraduates. It's going to be a marvelous, marvelous facility. So I do some big things like that. But you asked a broader question, which is about education generally.
Yes.
I think, to be candid about it, the U.S., which used to be the tops in the world, when I was young, started declining around 1970 in primary and secondary education. There are a number of reasons for that. But now, depending upon who's doing the measurements, we're like number 25 in the world, number 30. This is an issue of enormous focus for me and concern, because we can't have an equitable society without everybody getting the same similar directionally really good education. We're moving into a post-industrial age, and students who aren't taught successfully are at such enormous disadvantage that you can try and do a lot of things in later life, which can have some success. But as we all know, if the foundation of somebody's learning is not where it's supposed to be, you're sort of swimming upstream. And so I think this area really needs a lot of attention. In China, where I spend time, just to give you an idea of where we stand competitively, I was meeting with one of the top people in their country, and he said they're moving to have every student in their country. And for those who don't know, they have 1.4 billion people, and the U.S. is somewhere around 330 million. But in their population, every student, when they go to school, is going to learn computer science. In the United States, that number is probably 5%. How in the world are we ever going to compete with China, with everybody being exposed to it? Not every student will have the capability of taking that farther. But the ones, if everyone's exposed to it, then they'll have a huge number of people And meanwhile, we're just disadvantaging the people in our society. So in terms of education generally, I believe that, education is the passport to a better life. It certainly was for me. I probably would have been a hairdresser or something if, I didn't have a chance to go to the really great educational institutions that I did. And we have to do not better. We've got to do dramatically better. And one of the things I do, my wife and I are the largest supporters in the United States of Catholic school education. As you might guess, I'm not Catholic. I don't do it because it's Catholic educations, although the Catholic people like me. I do it because 90% of their kids are minorities. This is in New York. And 70% are at the poverty line or below. And 99% graduate high school. And 96, 97% of the 99% go on to college. This is the same group that is getting these very unfortunate outcomes in other educational settings. So you can provide really good outcomes, and I'm putting money into that, but whatever I put into it really, is not relevant in the scale of the issue nationally. So that's more than you wanted to learn from me, I think, when you asked that question.
No, this is actually what I was hoping to learn from you asking this question, because this is a question of fundamental importance for the future of the country. And I do agree with you that we have to put much more emphasis in the early stages of education, and that one example of computer science is a new paradigm for literacy, for future success, is something that we have to embrace.
But, it's fascinating from talking with the people at the cutting edge of AI. AI could potentially, with distance learning in the right settings, making sure everybody has a device so they can profit from it. You can do all kinds of amazing things, instructing kids who might not be in a great, quote, school district. If they can get equivalent type of teaching, and if we can facilitate, virtual learning. They had one funny thing. I was with some guys at MIT, and they were saying, we could actually see a world where we have robot dogs as pets for kids, and the dogs can be programmed to teach them different subjects, and the dogs never go away. Right? They're with them 24 hours a day. And so the mechanisms for delivery of education may change dramatically when looking forward, 10, 20 years.
So let's just stay on the topic of artificial intelligence, because I think it's very, very important for the future of the world. And I would like to ask you to answer a question that I asked actually in our one conversation, the founder of the SoftBank Innovation Fund, whose entire focus is on the artificial intelligence. And there are all these wonderful opportunities to use artificial intelligence in education, in industry, in medicine. But then I asked him the question about, and how about in investing? Does he use artificial intelligence and a differentiating tool when it comes to the ability to make a good pick, take a look at a company, and use the artificial intelligence as a tool for better investing? You've been very successful with Blackstone, needless to say. I want to speak about that topic, but I would like to start with this little intro. How do you think about it?
Well, artificial intelligence is really already being used a lot in the investment business. So for example, we have a group within the firm, and they go to work on what I would regard as sort of small problems, if you will, but interesting. where if you were interested in, for example, in what's going on around a shopping mall. To the extent anybody's ever going to go to shopping malls anymore, just won't buy online. But you can actually analyze, what's going on with how many cars are coming, where are they going. You could almost, with the right cameras, see what bags they're bringing out, and you learn what's happening with patterns that you wouldn't know before, because you can do it, sort of all the time. It's not like you have one person counting and they miss things or whatever. And so we're finding about a third of money now is managed quantitatively, it's called, which is basically principally off of the use of computers with algorithms and other types of things. So we humans are being a bit marginalized, or like all AI, a bit helped with these types of tools. So this isn't some kind of futurist look. This is happening now, and it's quite useful.
Yeah.
I must say, just as a human, humans aren't so bad either. So sometimes they get too emotional when they're managing money, and they get excited and sell at the wrong times. And, because like any good therapist would tell you, you have to distance yourself emotionally from what's going on around you, so that you can make objective decisions rather than get caught up in a famous book. It was called The Madness of Crowds, written probably 100 years ago. And that's not useful, but much like medicine, where AI is going to make doctors just much more effective because of the ability to analyze, whether it's radiology or ophthalmology or all kinds of different applications. This is going to lead to a huge jump in effectiveness and productivity in the medical area.
So Blackstone has been a resounding success, obviously, since you founded the company, once you left Lehman Brothers and starting a business. And everyone knows about you. That's an immense and a remarkable success. What I'm interested in asking is about the culture of the company. How did you make sure that this success continues? What are the thoughts that you and your partners are thinking behind the culture, the recruitment, the topics that are really important today, diversity? Do you see this as important? How do you think about those broader organizational topics as you run such a dynamic organization?
Well, that's a great question. And that's because I've got a great answer for it. And it's something that I started thinking about really when we started the company. Who do we want to work with internally? What feeling do we want to have? And what are our values? And when you start a business, it's a lot easier than when you inherit a business as a CEO. Because when you inherit a business or an organization of any type, whether it's a medical center, it already has its culture. It's very difficult to change a culture. But if you don't have a culture, on the one hand, it's hard because there's no culture. But on the other hand, you can establish it. And what you have to do is be pretty rigid on what your values are. And because you have to teach those values to everybody in the company, and there's no exceptions. And so our culture, is based on meritocracy. It's based on hard work. It's based on openness and transparency, lifetime learning, continual invention, and innovation. I believe in a zero defect culture. Which if you were running a medical center, you would want that. And I want that too. And that means you can't make every decision correctly because of the dynamism of it. But you can have every piece of paper that's prepared or now, and sort of email, memo. There are no misplaced commas. There are no numbers that aren't right. You have to set a standard. You have to set a standard for integrity. That when we say we'll buy something at a certain price, we will. I had some fascinating experience when we were recruiting some people in real estate, and this new person came to a meeting and said, well, we should offer X dollars for this property. And I said, that seems awful high. He said, well, it is high. We'll just wait to the closing and lower it. They can't go any other place. I said, but that's dishonest. He said, well, that's how the business works. I said, I'm not going to do things like that. We're going to tell people what we think and we stick with it. He said, well, you'll never buy anything because you won't be the high price payer. I said, but you're not paying the high price. You're just talking the high price. And he said, yeah, but everybody in the industry does it. And I said, I don't know this industry. And we're going to just do it the way we do corporate business, the way I do all things. You tell people what you think, and then you do it. He said, well, you're going to miss a lot of deals. I said, well, maybe at the beginning, but nobody wants to go through the process you're talking about. And if people learn that we'll do what we say, we'll be fine. And I said, by the way, if you ever come into this room again and suggest something like that, you're going to not be in it a second time. And so we, that's part of our culture. We're now the largest owner of real estate in the world. So I guess what I thought wasn't like such a bad idea. We changed the industry in that sense. Not that all people did that, but many did. So when you have these kind of core values, and another core value is no internal politics, and we in effect can do that because the way we set the firm up, I basically have all the votes, although I don't sort of exercise that because you don't need to, but if you ever had to, you could. And I'm not retiring and I'm not going anywhere. So the normal monkey business in organizations of who's going to succeed so-and-so and who's got power, is sort of taken off the table because that's totally dysfunctional. And the final value is we only hire nice people. I don't want to work with truly gifted people who are malignant personalities. And we can attract malignant personalities in finance. I'm sure all doctors are wonderful. But in finance, we get a range. And I only want nice people because if this is your day-to-day environment, why would you ever want weirdos? Even if they're really good, leave them to other occupations. Or let them start their own firm. Yeah. But I don't want those people. So we have a very supportive, very open, very outside focused type of thing. Now, how do you preserve that, which is the second part of what you asked? The way you do it is you get your people together in every group every week, and you treat everyone as equals. So you include everybody in the culture. So what we do in each of our, what I call verticals, private equity is one, real estate is another, our hedge fund area is another, our credit business is another, our infrastructure business is another. We have a number of these. So all day Monday, the top few people at the firm meet with everyone in each of those groups by group. And we review everything going on, everything we're looking at investing, things we own, where there are some changes, good or bad. And we have people from all over the world at that one meeting. If it's private equity, from every place in the world. So I believe the way you inculcate culture is if everybody feels that they're included just the same the highest person at the firm, the starting person, and you discuss everything that's going on. The sense of inclusion, the sense of ownership, the sense of importance is instantly transmitted. And because the senior people are there, if there's anything that's going on that needs some interpretation in terms of right and wrong, I'm not a believer that things are like sort of wrong and they're sort of right, morally, ethically. I don't believe it. There's sort of, I call it at the firm, middle-class values. You don't need a lawyer to tell you what's right, what's wrong. We all know, and we don't want to get close to that line. And one way you transmit culture is when situations turn up, which are gray, which happens in all organizations. You have to say, well, here's where we're going and why. Yeah. And you don't do that every meeting because that doesn't come up every time. But if your senior people aren't passing on that culture, what'll happen lower down in the organization, you'll develop bad habits. So it's not dependent upon me to do that. I'll do it if somebody else isn't. But we've been doing this for 35 years. So everybody's been at the firm, knows what we think right, wrong. And we're the only firm that hasn't had somebody sort of convicted of some kind of insider trading. I think we're the only one on Wall Street of any scale. It's because, we all believe the same thing and nobody's allowed to believe anything else. You can be from every ethnic group, religious group, different places in the world. We're completely open meritocracy culture. We set up different what we call affinity groups. We thought we didn't have enough women working in positions. We set up the women's group, had a new initiative, and now we went from 15% entry women to 40. It's pretty amazing. We did that in 5 years. And we have an LGBT group. We have a diverse group. And each one of these groups discusses how the firm can do things better. We implement these policies, and we don't have those groups exclusive just for those people. If somebody who's a guy wants to go to the women's diversity group, great. We're not a firm that wants to be exclusionary, and so as we go through, the types of things that are happening now for our firm, it's not a sort of a shocking kind of situation in some way, and we're sort of comfortably saying, okay, what else can we do a little bit better? And we're always trying to do these things better. So that's how we have this culture. And the other thing we do, and this may work for you, and I think it has, because I've seen your stuff in like Abu Dhabi, and spent time with the Crown Prince there, who's very proud of what you've done.
Thank you.
Expansion for an organization is very important. And the reason it's important is it keeps you thinking about new things and new ways to do things, but it also provides an opportunity for your people. And the reason why that's important, if you never expand, then in effect, people in an organization feel layered all the time. And the only way they can get promoted is basically destroying the person 1 or 2 levels above them. And that's one of the things that encourages this awful, sort of behavior in most organizations. We are always expanding, coming up with new ideas for investors that are better. But what happens is we need somebody to run that. Yeah. We need somebody to staff it. And so we're continually moving talent up because we have no glass ceilings. They don't exist in the organization. And that flywheel is really important for building and preserving your culture.
Well,
Again, a longer answer than you wanted.
No, but it's an important one, and I'll just conclude our conversation with one question that I'm really interested about hearing your opinion. We're obviously now in an unprecedented. Oh, okay, it is a Mandarin version of the book. Yeah,
we have an English version.
Yeah.
Which was a bestseller. It's called What It Takes.
Yeah.
And we have a Chinese version. And in one of the craziest things, we just did the Chinese version in April. I became the #1 best-selling author in China.
Congratulations.
And if you paid attention at all, you would see I'm not Chinese. They're very interested in how to be successful, how to do new things. Their culture commercially is quite similar. They like innovation. They're pretty bold, so I just did a live stream. In fact, yesterday we had 1 million people, and maybe I'm in the wrong occupation or something instead of finance. At least in China, you can get big numbers.
Absolutely. So I just want to ask you one more question before we conclude our conversation, and that is your views on probably one of the most challenging issues that we're dealing with in recent history. COVID pandemic has affected not only the health of the nation and the health of people across the globe, but obviously had a profound impact on economy. If you were to extrapolate your experiences at Blackstone Group, your interactions with the world leaders, of which you have had many, and if you were to give an advice to those who are in a position, obviously, to exert an influence across the globe, what would that advice be?
Well, there's backward-looking advice that doesn't, do anybody much good. Correct. Because you know what you would have done, perhaps differently, and you've got forward-looking advice. I think, if you just took where we were today, you do a huge buildup in your tracing because testing and tracing when you don't have a vaccine is basically all you've got to find people who are your infected people or people who are spreading. And so that technology isn't difficult. It's applied in many other places in the world. The U.S. is dramatically behind, and it either takes people or it takes, the use of the internet, and it also takes a population willing to want to help itself, minimize these types of things. So that's the one thing I would be doing. I think we're already doing a pretty remarkable job in vaccine development. There are like 130 of them. And the law of large numbers, I guess 3 different, sort of types of vaccines being developed, that the law of large numbers says that out of 130, you're not going to go 0 for 130. So what I would tell leaders on that is I think the delivery system is going to be more challenging than finding a virus that works. When you try and distribute as quickly as possible billions and billions of doses of vaccine, that's a challenge I don't believe we've really focused on because we're so focused on finding a vaccine that works. I think that in the interim, the idea of keeping, distancing and things that just obviously, how can you go on an airplane without masks and things that are logical need to be kept in place. On the other hand, if you're a leader, you can't keep your population locked up and say you can't open a restaurant with either 25 or 50% of the people able to go there. At the same time, you're endorsing widespread protests with people breathing all over each other. And even though it's better to be outside, obviously, than inside, what it does when you do things like that, the people who are restrained indoors for 2 months to 3 months, they basically lose the plot. And they say their leaders aren't treating them equitably. And so then they act out in a way that defies the logic of wanting to have things work with masks and distancing that minimizes the spread. The final thing that leaders are going to have to think through is what happens once a vaccine is developed. In terms of who gets it is one level of things, who gets it when, and how do countries cooperate. But an actually more interesting question that hasn't been thought through at all is what's going to happen when people say, I don't want to be vaccinated. I was at some medical group, in the last 2 weeks, and the estimate that this person gave me is pretty eminent person, although it's a guess, is that 30% of a population may say, I don't want to be getting a vaccine. Now, if vaccines at max are only 80% effective, because I guess the flu vaccine is 50%.
Yeah.
So let's say we had like some kind of remarkable outcome. So you got 20% of the people who may be spreaders anyhow. But if you get 30% of the population, I don't know what the number will be, who can spread everything anyhow. So the whole utility of the vaccine is much more compromised. And how society is going to deal with people who say, I'm very happy to infect you. I have no obligation to you. I'm a free actor. I'll do whatever I feel like doing because I have guaranteed freedoms. I grew up as a young person when they had the polio sugar cube, and we all went to school. I was in elementary school, and every kid just took it. There wasn't this kind of, hi, I want to get measles, and I want to spread measles to anybody I can. You just couldn't go to school if you didn't take the vaccine. And I think we're going to have to really, it's a moral, ethical, legal issue. I don't think anybody's thinking about it. And so when you ask me a question, what would I recommend? Somebody better be thinking about these things.
Steve, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on a broad array of subjects. We're very grateful for all that you do, for your leadership, in particular for your generosity to the causes that matter. We truly appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Well, I'd like to just say in closing that you all do a remarkable job. And you just don't do it in Cleveland. You know, you've had to get up and go to establish things around the world. You provide an amazing level of excellence to the people you do business with. You're a great example of America at its best. So congratulations to you.
Thank you very much. It's very, very kind of you to say that. Thank you again. Thank you all for being part of this virtual Ideas for Tomorrow. Our next Ideas for Tomorrow takes place on Tuesday, July 28th. Our guest will be Dr. David Feinberg, former CEO of UCLA and Geisinger Hospital Systems and president of Google Health. Our future virtual Ideas for Tomorrow guests include Brian Grazer, co-founder and CEO of Imagine Entertainment, on August 18th, Judy Faulkner, founder and CEO of Epic Systems, on September 2nd, and Tim Brown, executive chair of IDEO, on September 21st. I look forward to seeing you then. Have a good week.